So I will go ahead and give the introductions. Thanks, Annie. So it's honestly my privilege to introduce Dr. Christopher Horsethief. His bio is in the conference program, but I will let you know that I've heard Dr. Horsethief speak probably about 4 or 5 times now. So he's definitely worth the wait. He has a real passion for this topic, and I know we're all going to be really pleased to hear him. So his presentation today is on person-oriented research from an Indigenous perspective. And I think he's coming back to the screen. Christopher, are you coming back? There you are. It's so nice to see you. We're all excited to hear from you. Thank you for helping be patient through some of the technical stuff that we're dealing with, but you're among friends and we're super excited to hear from you. So I'll hand it off to you, Dr. Horsethief.
Okay, great. I do have to say that I generally work nights, and so it's a little bit earlier than my regular schedule, which I'm sure is making everything seem just a little bit more challenging today. But I am very happy to be here. I have quite a heavy graphics laden presentation. And I'm very proud to start by saying a couple of things. The first is, we have many of our Ktunaxa elders and many people that are involved with the project I'm going to talk about today are viewing in a number of watch parties from our traditional territory. So I just want to say good morning and welcome to them. Also, I just wanted to say good morning in my people's language. Not a lot of people get to hear that, so I just wanted to literally tell everyone it's a good morning, all of you people. I'm very glad to be here with you. We didn't get a chance to check to make sure that the screen share will work, but I'm going to give it a shot right now. It says that the host has disabled attendee screen sharing. So if someone could enable that for me, that would be really helpful. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of me talking about pictures nobody will see, and that will be less than fun.
Christopher, you're all set to go.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Ktunaxa people. I'm going to start talking with a little bit of information on what our community used to be, which I kind of consider to be our cultural baseline. I'm going to talk about our collective experience, how we have overcome some adversity. And I want to end by talking about the notion of reconciliation and what that means to Indigenous people. While most of the emphasis on reconciliation is on kind of the formal apology to Indigenous people for the residential schools, for us, that apology is, I guess it's nice, but it doesn't give us any position to move forward from. For us, reconciliation is about opening up conversational space so there's a more equitable distribution of conversation resources. Our voice was forcibly removed from a number of very important conversations. And in 2015 to 2020, our primary focus is making sure that our partners, our industry partners, our educational partners, our research and health delivery partners are making sure that our voice is a part of the discussion and that our background, our nuance, our context, our details are also a part of that conversation, because that is what helps us. That's what gives us the opportunity to play a more meaningful role in our future. And I think in doing so, gives us a more meaningful role to play in Canada and really, I think, the global future, the future of humankind. So I want to start here by this picture. This is a man from the Lower Kootenay Indian Reserve, and he is standing next to one of our sturgeon nose canoes. This was a great cultural value for me to understand, because I've had the chance to build some of these canoes. And the thing that's most important about these canoes is every aspect of our environment, of our resources, what we call or the idea that some of our community members have important ideas that get passed on to younger community members to help them kind of stand and face the world. They are all really passed down through making these kinds of tools. And you can see that he's here with his kids. They are participating with their father. They're learning what they need to learn from the situation. And so that's kind of the beginning of the story. The next picture, I really love this picture. This is one of our elder women, and you can see she's teaching several of her grandchildren, possibly even her great-grandchildren, how to ride a horse together. This is a great kind of analog for culture, because you have to think about all of the explicit teachings that she had to share with her grandchildren for them to be able to be like this boy that's riding by himself. Think about, if you've been around horses, where you can stand, where you can where you should not grab a horse, or what you should not do to the ear of the horse, what you should do as far as your saddle, the other equipment that you need. There are a lot of explicit teachings that go into that process. And if you experience them for long enough, what you end up doing is being like this young man here. And the look on his face, this is a young man that's living life with purpose. This is somebody who's very proud to have learned those things and is moving through the process of becoming a writer on his own. But the reality is he's learning how to become a human being. He's learning how to become a member of one of our communities on his own. And then for us, everything started to change 100 years ago or so. And in this picture, I see my picture on here as well. And I don't know if you can see it, but in this picture now, things are really starting to change. The priest is now standing above everyone. The women are no longer letting their kids run free. They're not playing. At that age, from our cultural framework, the only job that children have is to watch community members and be happy. And now the dynamic has changed. You'll notice that the men are gone from the picture now. There's only one man, and it's the priest. He stands above everyone. This is a beautiful picture as far as kind of visual data and showing a representation of what colonization was. This is someone not from our community physically standing over everyone. The women are clutching their children. There are women hiding in the lodge with their kids. Those kids aren't doing the kinds of things that kids should be doing. If you've ever heard me present before, I give this list all the time. Missionary education specifically, and the process of colonization for our people has been described a number of ways in scientific and academic research, including probably the most important for me from George Tinker, an Indigenous scholar from Oklahoma, who described it as a fundamentally genocidal occurrence. And he went a step further and said, it doesn't matter if the missionaries didn't mean to do any harm. Intent is irrelevant. If you destroy a culture, you destroy a culture. So you don't get to hide behind the idea that we were only trying to help. Later, the process was described as soul damaging or soul wounding. I found a really amazing Canadian paper where they broke down the group dynamics of the community under the residential school process and said it was most important to understand that this crushed the individual energies of community members. And another that described it as depleting the collective immune system of Indigenous communities. One time I was at Gonzaga University in the green room getting ready for a presentation, and I looked down and lo and behold, there was a book on Father de Smet, who did spend time as a missionary in our community. The name of the book was Conversion of the Heart. And the primary thesis for Peterson and Pierce was that it wasn't enough to change the way that Indigenous people thought. You've just felt compelled to change the way that we felt. You didn't want to change our heads. You actually had to convert our hearts. You had to change us at the very core of who we are. And then one of our elders attended a conference where she heard the term that she told me was very meaningful to her, that this whole process of kind of overcoming this history, the phrase that she told me was, we were dismembered and we needed to be remembered. So physically taken from our community, separated from our parents, separated from our grandparents, separated from all of those tools that we need to go from one generation to the next to live a good, stable life, separating us from all of those. And later on, when I started studying our community and the impact on our social and cultural networks, we started to see that in many ways, it wasn't just being separated from our community or our resources, but we were really being separated from ourselves. We were being separated from a sense of purpose, from a sense of self, from a sense of responsibility, from a sense of community. And so because I am a network analyst and because I love the math and I like the visual data, I've just sketched out a community here. This is kind of what we do, like every human problem-solving group on the planet. We organize ourselves into clusters. We have small worlds. We have this high clustering and low geodesics, which means that if a community member needs to relay important information across the community, it doesn't require 20 small jumps to go from one side of the network to the other. We can see that there are some clusters, and we can also see that there are some people that are bridging these clusters together. So you would get information through those people in the middle of the network, and we could solve problems very efficiently, especially under times of duress. If there is something terrible that's happened, you don't want to have to ask for a bunch of people's phone numbers or play the equivalent of that game we played in middle school called telephone, right? Where you have to relay a message through everyone in the circle. Number one, there's a high probability of entropy or disorder in that information as it moves around the circle. And also it's very time consuming. So you want to have the kinds of network structures that all human problem solving collectives have. You want to be able to move efficiently, move information very efficiently. But now imagine that someone comes along and essentially just cuts the ties for every node in that network. This is essentially what happened. Our children separated from their siblings at the residential school, separated from their cousins, separated from their language, their spirituality, separated from their parents, their aunts and uncles who were viewed as other kinds of parents, other meaningful relatives in their lives, separated from their grandparents, from the stories, the language, the culture, the spirituality, separated from everything. Albert Leslie Barabashi would say you kill a network by just cutting the ties between nodes. Because if nodes in a network can't share information, then they have to solve every problem from first principles. They no longer have access to the information they need to live a healthy life, and they are stuck in this constant state of having to do everything from scratch. This is entropy. This is what happens when you take a community and you forcefully redesign their clusters and their individuals with high eigenvector centrality, the people that bridge groups together. This is what the Indian agent did, and this is what the priest did. You just rewire, you literally hack a community's code, and you do things that are very, very inefficient. You put that person down at the bottom in charge and make them central. I do like that person has a dog, but that person was not the previous chief that had generational experience since the beginning of time. That person in the middle was taught how to relay information in a culturally relevant way for people to solve important problems. And now we've arbitrarily picked someone else and we've made them the center of everything that we're doing. This is entropy. This is disorder. This is like playing the game Tetris, but playing it in black and white, or even worse, changing the color of the pieces so that when you see a possible solution, it looks completely foreign to you. Every decision that you make becomes much harder. And there are now multiple sets of values involved in every single decision that's made. It's a very ineffective way of solving problems. This is my idea of resilience. You'll notice that I've added some red lines on here. These are not the links from the first picture, because in 2020, I don't want to solve problems using tools from the 1900s or the 1800s or 1,000 years ago or 13 millennia ago when our people emerged from the earth. I don't want to solve problems. I don't want to build a new house using a hammer from 1952. I live a long way from the people that I work for. I'm not going to ride a horse to work every day. It would take me like a week and a half to get there. That would be crazy. I want to be able to preserve those original links. I want to make sure that the tools that our community once had are still available if they make sense, but I want the ability to adopt and adapt as we need to. If we need to build new links, if we need new information pathways, if we need to be able to innovate, if we want to be able to adapt in a way that further marries us in a sustainable way to our resources, you let us make those decisions, because we won't disrespect those older ways and we'll continue to adopt newer tools. This to me is a network sociogram representation of resilience. You're not relegating us to strategies that don't work. You're not making us use strategies that you came up for us. You're allowing us to pick what we need, those deep cultural structures, another idea from George Tinker, where we negotiate our meaning, where we build our identities, our language, our culture, our spirituality, the relationships with our families, the way we understand problems, the way that we describe them. Our name for our language is literally the noises we make to one another, the way we share information to solve problems. This is a community in 2020 solving its problems together. We're not disrespecting those older structures. We're not replacing them. If the way we pray or the words that we have are important to us, we get to keep them. If there are new tools that suit us for solving problems in 2020, we get to adapt and take those tools on as well. This is a more pictorial picture of that process of entropy. Of course, this is one of the famous pictures of a boarding school, missionary, residential school education. This was the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. Pratt was a Civil War military officer. After the Civil War, dedicated his life to literally killing the Indian, saving the child, killing the Indian, saving the Christian. And I have a daughter and she's got friends, and I know that when you get them together, it becomes exponentially more difficult to get them to pose for a picture, to do the same thing. There are 1,000 kids in this picture and not one of them is smiling. There's 1,000 kids in this picture and there are 1,000 broken souls. And if you don't believe me, you can spend hours looking at this picture, and what you see are the ghastly, ghostly faces of children that have been separated from every sense of humanity that they've ever understood. You're just hacking their code. You're making them learn something new and adopt an entirely new system. We, as a globe, post-World War II or around World War II, decided that it would be considered a crime against humanity if you took children with the express purpose of trying to change culture. But the residential schools were doing that well into the 1990s. So intent is irrelevant. Doesn't matter how well people meant. This caused massive, systemic, widespread, overpowering disorder. Now, the reason I picked those few words is because those are also the requisite characteristics for collective trauma. That's trauma that's absorbed not by individuals, but absorbed by the social fabric of the community. So when I first started doing this work, we tried to start figuring out how we were going to rebuild, how we were going to take the broken pieces of that network, and we were going to, first off, determine whether or not enough cultural DNA was left to support this rebuilding. Because if you don't have a strong cultural network and you continue to put weight on it, it's like the bad foundation of a house. It's like using tools from the 1950s to build a contemporary home in the 2000s. The more weight you put on, the greater the likelihood it's going to collapse. So we first had to determine if those primary modes of transmitting cultural information were still available to us. And we decided to rebuild one of our sturgeon nose canoes. Many of our Salish neighbors are rediscovering the sturgeon nose canoe. Our Ktunaxa people never quit making them. I've had the pleasure, I've had the honor of working on several, from a pile of sticks and twigs and a roll of bark into a 24-foot long vessel that's capable of carrying an entire family. This used to be called our Indian station wagon, because the entire family, including the dog, and there's a bunch of pictures of the dog sitting up in the nose cone, which is kind of funny, that also have a huge sturgeon, because they're fishing and they're being a family and they're on the water and doing the kinds of things that they would have done. So we started to do workshops where we got kids together and we told them, we're going to build one of these. We're going to directly connect you by putting your hands on the same resources that your parents and your grandparents and their parents and so on and so forth for 1,000 generations have had a chance to learn. And inevitably, when you are working on one of those and you're shaping the hoops that give the hull its shape, they're made of cedar. Inevitably, one will break. And if you're in the gym at the Lower Kootenai Indian Band, which is one of the places that we work on these canoes, you hear that crack echo around like thunder. And all of the kids will pause, right? It's like if nobody moves, nobody will know that they broke one. And we tell them, hey, it's okay. Our culture is strong and it's robust, and our people have ways to cope with these problems. And we tell them, if you are tying your cedar roots and it breaks, you walk out that back door, you go 10 meters under the nearest cedar tree and you kick the ground until you can see cordage and you can pull it up yards at a time. If the bitter cherry that's used to very effectively strap two flat pieces together breaks, you're going to go across the parking lot to the tree at the very corner. You're going to bring this saw. You're going to cut us 1 foot. We're not going to take any more than we need. You cut 1 foot, look for a branch that's already been cut. You bring that back and we'll show you how to pull meters and meters of strapping off. And if you break one of those bows, if you break one of those cones, we're going to send you maybe halfway to Patty Jacobs' house. And we're going to send you with the pruning shears, and you're going to find, and we'll give them a maple leaf, and you're going to find one of these trees. It's got to be a sapling. It's got to be bigger than 1/2 an inch. It's got to be smaller than 1.5 inches. And we just send them out to do it. We're physically rebuilding those nodes into the network. And if you want to see kids that are proud, you watch them bring back a sapling that they went and got. They bring it back like they are carrying the biggest bull elk from the most amazing hunt they've ever been on. These boys, these 3 boys whose job it was to go get that one piece, carried it back together like it was the greatest spoils of war they were ever bringing it back to us. And that was that purpose-driven life that was being reconnected to that network. So we figured if we could do that with kids, why couldn't we do it with adults? So we started having very basic language workshops where we asked adult community members to come in and learn basic parts of the language. And they did. They came in, they sat down, in a way, they kind of humbled themselves. In a way, they came to the realization that they were going to have to start from scratch in some ways. And we got them to start doing that. In this picture, we have band counselors, we have chiefs, we have some elders, we have people that were residential school students, we have children that were in the 1950s removed from their families, and language is again becoming that point of contact for rebuilding where they belong in that network. It's a purpose-driven life that is fueled by the kinds of cultural information that was literally beaten out of our communities. And people can get really weird about the residential schools weren't that bad, like that one Canadian senator. But the reality is that detailed, contextual, nuanced information about us and our way of life and how we related to our resources, that was all stripped for a period long enough that they just figured we would never remember it again. But lo and behold, the elders in the 1990s had a freshly graduated bachelor student who showed up and said, just teach me whatever. And they started talking to me about things like the animal families. This is a poster we created that has 7 of our animal families, and then each has 7 of the animals from those families. And you can see that human beings are in the middle of that. The only species that can affect every other species on here. This is also a representation of part of our nation vision statement, which says that for us to be a healthy community, we have to be interacting with our resources. We have to understand our relationships to other people. We have to understand our cultural information such that we can live the way our ancestors did. And here are adults doing that. That's not easy for adults to do. Feelings of guilt, feelings of shame, those kinds of things raise your emotional, affective filters, and you stop focusing on new information and you start focusing on the emotions that you're feeling. And it's not very effective. And here we have a group together working through this process. So we had already been developing this idea of ukeneshwe tiasha. Uke in our language means one. Ishwi, for us, our sign language here, ishwi is kind of the same verbal stem for our word for heart. And that asha at the end is talking about a group. Ukeneshwe tiasha, that's the way our language works. It's very transparent. It's highly agglutinated, and those little pieces get glued together in such a way that we get this rich meaning from every word. Ukeneshwe tiasha. That's a group solving problems with one heart. Ignore the cluster of people off to the side. And if you look at that circle of people, the way we solve problems is the one person asking for help. That's the person at the very bottom of that circle. They present the group with a question, and that group goes around the circle one at a time. And they all produce solutions. And there's just a couple of very simple rules. No one gets to tell anyone they don't belong. No one gets to tell anyone they're wrong, and no one gets to cut anyone off. Every single person in that circle has the opportunity to share their information. Consensus decision-making in our community is not every single person agrees. That's a very kind of pan-Indian, kind of a very romantic notion of consensus decision-making. For us, it means every single person gets the chance to give their input, and the decision maker at the end considers all of the input. You can see the arrows are going all the way around the circle. Every time we have a problem, traditionally, this is what we do. We started doing this with our elders group, and we started refining ideas in our own cultural framework, but also relating them back in English to people that we needed to interact with. Remember, I talked about reconciliation being our industry partners, our educational partners, our research partners. We started looking for a way to interact very effectively. And what we started to get was external researchers that would approach us, and they would say, hey, we want to work on this thing with you, and we want to come up with something new. We want to not do what researchers have done in your community for 100 years, which was to impose our ideas on you and kind of just smash our way through your cultural system. So those researchers started, sorry, I jumped ahead one here. You can see that number one, this is the arrow. That researcher reaches out to the primary problem solver. In the case of the project I'm going to talk about today, that researcher was Sana Sharam, who contacted me as the chair of the Research Ethics Committee and spokesman for the Ktunaxa Nation Council's language and traditional knowledge and language elders group. And she said, hey, we want to do some health research, but we want to do something different. We actually want to start with what's most important to you. We want to know how you would ask the question in your community, and we want to know how you would solve the problem, how you would crowdsource your data in such a way that everyone was represented. And then we want to find a way over time to work towards outcomes that empower your voice to be able to, from a cultural framework, be able to provide information in a more equitable discussion, so that at the end of the day, your ideas of what healthy is are considered along with what Western researchers' idea of health was. And so they contacted me with some questions, and I said, that's really amazing. I'm going to do that thing that we do. I'm going to ask our elders, and we're going to go around the room. So we did that. That's the second question here. You can see that information is routing around that group. And the thing that happened that was most amazing was that instead of people becoming emotionally triggered, thinking about that collective trauma, instead of our elders shutting down, instead of acting from a place of having that collective chip on their shoulder from the process of cultural upheaval or cultural disruption, they did that thing that Ktunaxa people pride themselves on. They said, let's build a relationship here. We have someone that's willing to listen to us. Let's ask them a few questions. So they took a few of the terms that they didn't quite understand as well as they wanted to. And by the time we went around the circle, I had a list of questions to send back to the researcher. And the elder said, I want to know more about this. I want to know what's going on. I'd like to meet that researcher. So when we then, at that point, sent our feedback back to the researcher, we said, first off, your team should find a way to come out and sit down with our elders, because that's most important. This is a conversation. This isn't a means of separating information from a network and emailing it for other people to work. You need to come here and be a part of this with us. You need to come out. You need to have a meeting. At that meeting, the very bare minimum, we need to have a lunch, because in our community, every meal with the group is a sacred thing. Every feast is a ceremony where there are very explicit instructions, and there's a significant amount of meaning. And I said, you come out and spend some time with us. The elders are really interested in talking one-on-one with you about figuring out what it is that you need, but also finding out how we can share that in a way that also helps us. And of course, there was an amazing research team that decided that's the way that it has to be. If we are doing reconciliation, we have to find a way to open up the conversational voice to Indigenous voices. We have to find a way to open the conversational space to other perspectives. We need to find a way to make sure we're not shearing away the context, the detail, the nuance, the important ideas, so that at the end, we have something that works for everyone. So around the same time, we started thinking, how can we best do this thing in a circle? And we had recently built one of our cultural structures that's in the shape of a circle. And we started getting people together to continue to test this idea if using that thinking with one heart circular framework would be helpful, not only to work with researchers, but continue to develop the internal things that we needed to do as a group. This is a picture of our roundhouse from the Lower Kootenai Indian Reserve. And this is now not just a place where we go to pray. This is also a place where we have AA meetings. This is a place where we have other support group meetings. This is a place where we center all of our participants when we are doing cultural workshops. This is one of those places that we are taking control of the disorder and the entropy that was imposed on us. And we find ways to channel that back into a healthier network. This particular picture, as well as the previous one, was from a workshop on genealogy, because in the 1990s, our community was physically separated from our genealogical resources. A Western researcher showed up and said, I want to do research, but keep in mind the data belongs to me because I'm the researcher. I'm working on a thesis. I'm a scientist and it belongs to me. And a number of individuals started working with that genealogist, and almost immediately we found a number of inaccuracies. And when community members that in many cases were the sons and daughters of the people that had this inaccurate information encoded and tagged to, their parent nodes on that network. When the leafs went back to the nodes and said, this is not accurate, the researcher said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm the only one that can make updates, and it needs to meet certain criteria that I have. That was fundamentally traumatic for people that had been removed from their parents, who had been removed from their grandparents, and everything shut down. That project did not end well. And as a result, we went 15, 20 years without ever talking about genealogy. So in rebuilding our network from a cultural framework, in that cultural building, we got people together and we started working on family trees together. And we told everyone, even if you only know your parents, even if you don't know anyone, you come in and sit down with us and the community will grow together. That root system will replenish you. We will find a way to connect you. And what we ended up getting were not just family trees. We got genograms that had roots and leaves. We had pictures. We had still pictures. We had English names. We had Dunacha names. We had all kinds of information, metadata that was tagged on. And then we pulled everybody in one-on-one for an interview, because if you're working with me, at some point there's going to be an interview. And we asked people to start talking about what was difficult about this and how did you get over it. And they all said at some point, I got to a place where I didn't know where I belonged, or I couldn't go any further with my network. And I didn't know anyone besides my parents or maybe my grandparents. And then lo and behold, my cousin would come over and they would share something with me. And someone else would come over and they would show how these two families were connected. People started to realize that at the edge of one genogram, they just draw go to so-and-so's map, and it would just go to another map, and that's how they were connected. So it was a really beautiful process. And then we got back to this idea of how do we do this kind of thing with the outside world. This is a great picture here. These are our elders. This is the Traditional Knowledge and Language Advisory Committee that also serves as the advisory for the Indigenous Research Project, which is the project we have with Interior Health and our research team. And in this picture, you can see there are a couple of generations in here. That's Chief Joe Pierre from Akam. That's his son, and his mother is also at this meeting. This was one of the meetings where we were continuing to refine these ideas about cultural values and how culture translates to health. This is one of those meetings where we sat down talking about how do we do this with researchers in a culturally appropriate way, so that our voice, number one, our voice is being a part of the conversation, but number two, that we're not doing it from a position of activism. We're not doing it from a position of being emotionally charged and frustrated. We're not doing it from a position of carrying trauma, being hurt people that are hurting people, that are trying to use cultural resources as a way to dispossess other people or strike them down or take their power or their purpose away from them. How do we do this in a way where we build towards something good? The primary outcome for this meeting was that the next time we got together with our Interior Health research team, that we find some way to celebrate with the community. We knew we were working on this report for some of these very important ideas. We had already developed some graphics, and we were talking about giving this information back to the community, because for us, that's a ceremony. If we work on something together and you create it and you put it together and you put it in this format that it can reach everyone, then we sing for it to come back into our community. We celebrate it to come back in such a way that it benefits everyone. And so we decided to open up in an unprecedented, very emotional day when we picked the date for the research team to come back, and we were going to have this community meeting where we gave this research back to the nation. One of my relatives and the primary spokesman for our elders groups, Chief Sophie Pierre, who you'll hear from later in the conference, texted me and said, you know what? That weekend is going to be really close to our bitterroot harvest. And the bitterroot harvest in our community is an important ceremonial event where there's a chief and there is a process and there are a number of protocols for preserving that part of our diet. And I can tell you right now, I was a little bit nervous about it because that is very generally a closed event. It's not the kind of thing that we open up to everyone. And it's one of those few things that is a truly healthy, beautiful practice. And when we started thinking about inviting people in, those of us that are very familiar with some of the group dynamics in our community, we all took a deep breath and we thought, okay, there's like 50 places where things could go wrong today. And it was very beautiful because at the end of the day before, the interior health researchers, after our elders group left, they looked at me and said, will we be allowed to go? Or do you want us just to stay and help prepare food? And I said, I think what needs to happen is in the morning when our bitterroot chief shows up for the meeting, I think you should go to that person and you should say, I'm here to help however you think is most appropriate. And at that point, I figured there was like a 12% chance that they would be allowed to go with us and take part in this this part of who we are. The bitterroot feast, the bitterroot dig was one of the very first ceremonies that I took part in where I realized I was part of a community. And for many people, it's the first time, and it's one of the only times every year where we eat a meal where those traditional foods are absolutely requisite. And it's a really big cultural event for us, not just as families or individuals, and not just as kids that were adopted or kids that grew up in residential schools, but it's a really big event for all of us to come together and eat a meal where we are all sitting down in a place of mutual respect and a place of collaboration and a kind of a forward thinking kind of where do we go from here attitude. So in the morning, the team asked our chief how they could best help. And our chief said, well, you'll come and dig for me. So that way I can just peel. And at that point, I could feel the tension kind of break in my body. I started to, for the first time, realize that our community is much more resilient than we ever thought. And that this didn't go badly and nobody got yelled at. And I can tell you, I was the very last car. And as I watched the last car pull out of the parking lot and head towards the direction of the digging fields, I just had this deep breath, this moment where I thought, besides a flat tire, nothing can go wrong from this point forward. What we did was we went to a field in one of our communities and we sat the chairs in a circle and we had a discussion and then we started digging. And then lo and behold, off in the distance, the school bus pulls up. And if you look here, these kids aren't just walking up here. These kids are running. They're kicking up the dust like an old school 1970s cartoon. They got here with such enthusiasm because they got to live some purpose. They got to dig and prepare food that would go to the community. They got to work with not only their teachers, but with their parents and their grandparents, and they got to do it as a group learning. This was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my community. Here again, we have our chief, Sophie Pierre, giving this beautiful lecture in this person-to-person instruction on one of the most important things that we need for our healthy food, for our healthy lives, for our conceptualization of being a healthy community. And here she is with all of these kids. And then right after this, we kind of turned the kids loose to dig. And it was the most frenetic, nearly chaotic, but amazingly supportive scene of these kids working with their parents and their grandparents and digging and learning how to pull up the roots and what to do with the part of the plant that you don't keep and how to identify the heart and how to bury the heart again, how to make sure that we had roots for the next year. All of those things that we would have never gotten had this practice been stamped out or pushed to the edge of extinction through the residential school process. So At the end of the day, our interior health team, with our community members and our elders and our chiefs and our counselors, got together at our building, and we had a ton of food, maybe not a literal ton measured, but we had enough to feed the 50 or so people that were here for months. And the goal was continue to do what a healthy community does. Don't just gather some food and get everyone together and hang out with some kids, but take all of this food, package it up at the end like we do at every ceremony that we do, and find a way to give it to community members, starting with the most vulnerable, the ones that may not be able to prepare or secure food for themselves, then to the elders, then to the sick, then everyone else takes some food with them. And as we were waiting, we were still just reflecting on the idea that here we were doing this research presentation where we were giving these very well researched, both from a Western and a Kronach scientific framework. We were getting ready to release that information, but we were also doing it with multiple generations and elders and chiefs and counselors and administrators. The kids came in and set up the tables for us. We had community members that volunteered to cook. We had everyone come together in the way that we come together when we are praying at our New Year's dance, when we are getting ready for our summer dances, for our other events, where we build each other up and we sit down and have a meal and talk about the most important things about health. Okay, so there's some fry bread on there too, and that's not the most healthy part. But the idea that we had just buckets of bitter root, and it's always funny when you watch a visitor to our community eating bitter root, because I don't know what they think it's going to be, because it's called bitter root, so it was pretty bitter. But we were able to prepare some of that. We also had some stew. We also had this way of getting everyone together. You can see that Gina's just really laughing there. This is what that day was about. It was about not feeling like researchers were controlling us. It was about understanding that researchers were there to work with us. It was about understanding that our voice had a valid role to play in not just reconciliation, but in scientific research, and I think being Canadian in general. It was also a time for us to have this very important, and I don't want to use the term in a saccharine way, but this very sacred meal that we all worked on together, including with our Western researchers. I bet you didn't think when you made that first phone call that you would be getting your hands dirty, digging for bitterroot out with everyone else. But it was an amazing process. Most recently, I do want to show that even during COVID, even during this time of social distancing, we are finding a way to hold each other up. We're finding a way to move forward with our research. This is our project team meeting from a week ago where we were talking about working on this, and it is an amazing team that includes community members, Indigenous people, non-Indigenous people. It includes scientific researchers that want to get to the truth. And for it to be the truth, it has to represent more than one framework. It has to represent more than one project, more than one set of stakeholders, and more than one perspective. What it did was give us this place where we can hold this truth up as a group together. The last thing I want to say is that as we were leaving the bitterroot field, I had to do that social media thing that I do. And I said, everybody come together, I want to get one picture. And you'll notice that this yellow bucket, this is a very particular kind of pail that used to be an ice cream pail. And they're getting harder to find. And this one had a little bit of a crack in it. So of course, one of the elders told me, Jade, hurry up with your picture. The water's dripping out the bottom and we don't want the roots to get hard. And then another one said, yeah, there's no restrooms out here. I got to get back to the office and use the restroom. But I asked everyone to get around and everybody to put their hands in there across generations, across stakeholder interests. There's Kronach people, there are non-Kronach Indigenous people, there are nephews and aunties, there are grandmothers and grandsons, there are researchers, there's everyone there together, including myself. You can see my ring there. holding this up together. And this is what research is in a metaphorical sense. Everybody holding it up together, many perspectives working towards the same thing, trying to find this parity in this equality in what research means to both sides. It's rigorous, it is well researched, it is internally consistent, it is based on literature, it is based on history, it is based on oral tradition, and it belongs to everybody that is there, striving to be resilient. And with that, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. You could have been anywhere else in the world today. You didn't have to be at an online conference, but you sat through the presentation, and in many ways, you got a chance to see a part of our community that we don't ever share because of our history with the residential school. But as we move forward with you as researchers, as Canadians, as human beings in 2020, this is what the world is to us. It's potential, and it's a direction and a goal to work towards. Thank you.
Wow. Dr. Horsethief, I mean, as I was telling the group before you signed on, I've heard you speak about 4 or 5 times. And I learn something new every single time I hear you speak. I think about something new. And each time what reconciliation and my responsibility to it is becomes more and more personal in terms of my actions. And so I just, from my heart, say thank you so much for sharing that, for joining us today. Just so incredibly powerful. And the comments, I don't know if you've been seeing them, just continue to fall in. So just sincere appreciation and thank you very much. To the rest of the audience, please tweet. I mean, this is such powerful stuff. Please share what you think you've learned from this throughout the day, but really just a powerful first presentation. And I know we've got some questions for you, Dr. Horsethief, so I'm gonna pass the baton over to Danielle, who's gonna help walk us through the Q&A, and just a reminder to folks to use the Q&A function below. But again, heartfelt thank you, deep appreciation, and I'll pass it over to you, Danielle.
I echo that appreciation. Christopher, very rarely am I struck speechless, but in this context I am. That was a beautiful and poignant presentation, and the use of visuals and your narrative to accompany it was phenomenal. So I guess I'm going to start off with a question, and I hope others ask questions or comments that they might have. There's a ton of praise for the presentation that you gave. You know, your presentation was so poignant about the harms in residential schools and where we're trying to go. And I think we're in a time now where we're reflecting on the harms continued in educational systems and in research systems. I believe I'm not alone in wanting change, and I thought your presentation, especially around networks and the entropy that can be caused when we come in and we try and create new networks without respecting what should already be there. There were so many threads to your presentation about how we as researchers can better partner. But I guess if I were to flip it on its head, what do you wish we did just as part of how we work? Of all the things that you shared with us, some phenomenal insight and guidance, where do we begin to change our approach to be more reflective of the community and the partnership that is just everything you spoke of?
Well, first, I just want to say I wasn't ignoring you. I was just retweeting those tweets. So that's really good. And also, thank you for recording this. I know there are community members from my community that weren't able to watch it, and we want to make sure that they have access to it too, which leads me, I think, to the first thing that I want to say. Forever, our community was looked at by the research community as just this source to take from, and that almost every research proposal that I get to review on behalf of the Ktunaxa Nation Council, there's no inclusion of honoraria. There is no thought about acknowledgement or understanding that if you interview one of our community members that does not belong to you or the research institution, that those things need to be negotiated, and we never cede our intellectual property rights. So in a way, that's a great place to start. But at the end of the day, whether you work at Cal Tire or you are a nurse in one of our local hospitals, or you are a flagger on a road crew somewhere, open up your conversational space to the history that is out there. The average person out there that thinks that Christopher Horsethief is just full of it, and that's just bleeding heart, feel bad for me, give that Indian money so that he feels better thing. The average person that feels that, they're never going to watch this and learn from it. They don't care what I have to say. They don't want to sit down and have a point counterpoint to work through this really awkward roadmap of emotional landmines. They're going to listen to you. They're going to see what you do. You don't look like me. You don't sound like me. You're not from my community. But when you hear someone say something like residential schools weren't really that bad and we got some really good things out of them, you can use your voice and your conversational space to say, you probably shouldn't lose the main point that it was an active genocide over 100+ years. And sure, there might have been some outcomes that weren't as terrible at others, but what was the opportunity cost? What did they lose by having been forced through the ringer in an English-only administration? It caused generations to go through school, to step away from their language, to stop transmitting it to their children, who stopped transmitting it to their children because they thought they were saving them. They didn't want that beaten out of them. And now 50 years later, we have this huge amount of intergenerational shame and guilt for not knowing our language. How do you address that? It takes our partners, whether they are health research partners or whether they are partners in our community, the people that we spend our social time with, the people at our restaurants, the people that we interact with every day. It takes you also reaching out to people, reminding it wasn't a random thing. And it doesn't matter if we meant to do good. And we probably should maybe be open to some of those conversations. So I think for myself, that's really, I think, what we need from everyone. Our community has really worked hard on first off, start understanding when you're triggered. Start understanding. If one of the things I used to say to our elders is, if by the time you raise your hand, you're raising a fist, you're carrying a lot. Shake it out. Take a deep breath. Think about what you're going to say. Think about some of these things we're doing to support one another. The only way you get through trauma is through the love and support of your social network. You all are our social network. We're looking to you for those opportunities, for that stability, to have a voice that backs up and says, hey, now there's something to this. This is not, this is not just some crazy thing that someone wants you to feel guilty about. There's a real documented history. And if you go back and look at the arguments in front of Parliament for the residential schools, they were inhumane. They're well documented. We're not making it up. So reminding people about that and facilitating that conversation, I think, is really helpful.
I appreciate that. And I think your point about social media or social networks, looking at the, your Twitter handle has been shared. And so your social network is going to grow. And I'm glad you're now part of ours. There was a question from Gwen, which I think is just a profound statement. How can we not consider this the gold standard for scientific research? And I think that echoes my sentiments, Gwen. And Jillian, I'm glad you were able to join us. She brought up the comment about intellectual property, and I want to raise that as well, because I noted that when you were speaking to that. Can you give some guidance on things if you were to steer us in a direction on what we should be considering for intellectual property and how that fits into the conversations we're having as we're building research?
Well, first, if you're working with Indigenous people, contact either their nation council or their alliance, or at the very minimum, the band for whoever you're working with. If they have a research ethics process like our community does, that is above and beyond what your research institution or university requires. It's no longer appropriate to go to Indigenous people and say, oh, our university has one. No, you have to also work with that community, because a part of what that is a reassertion of the idea that if you're going to interview, there needs to be some agreements. For us, coming from an oral tradition, that storytelling, that is our literature review. We'll tell you where it came from. We'll tell you how it can and can't be used. And there's always some part of that transmission that is the hypothesis test. I'll tell you something, maybe it's valid, maybe it's applicable, maybe it's not. And if it is, that's the way our culture works. So first and foremost, work with the research ethics mechanism for whatever community you're working with. And two, make sure that if you have a budget, part of that budget goes to the Indigenous community, whether it is for a dinner that you put up, that you invite people to, whether it is compensating people for their time. That's absolutely crucial. It's no longer acceptable to show up to a community and give us the story about how great your project is and all the things it's going to do, but we don't have any money to pay anyone for their time. If you're going to use people's time, you need to have a line item in your budget for that. Even if it's part of it for some kind of community work, it absolutely has to happen. And then as you work through these paperwork processes, understand that sure, you may have a consent form, but the consent form from our people is, this is always still a part of who I am at my core that can't be separated from me. So you need to make sure when you're getting ready to include a block quote, which is, this is something the Horsethief team did. Every block quote, that person was contacted and we said, here's a block quote that summarizes this part of our report. And you said this, do you think that this is accurate, and help us understand it a little bit better? All of those kinds of approaches make sure that you are reasserting that, I mean, how many people did I talk about here when I talked about any kind of research? It was all the researcher. I don't know who Barabashi talked to and when he did his interviews, because at the time, I don't think people thought about that. I don't know if, you know, Duran or any of those, I don't know who they are. But when you listen to the Horsethief project, we're going to tell you, we went to this community, we went to this event, this is what we talked about, this is the block quote, and we checked with that person to make sure it was accurate. That's the way oral tradition works. And that's how it marries up with this idea of not just informed consent, but also how do you build context in so it always belongs to that community member? They were representing that group and they said this. This is their understanding of it, not the researcher's understanding. So those are a few of the strategies that we try and encourage people to keep in mind when they're working with information that's kind of derived from interactions with Indigenous people.
Thank you for that answer. I really appreciate it. I know we're winding towards 10 o'clock, and an effort to keep us on time, I'm going to wind this panel down, but I do want to say that problem solving with one heart, that was something, that concept I loved, the visual I loved, the approach was phenomenal. And I look forward to hearing more of your presentations from you and your team and your community later today. I'm going to stop now and hand it back to you, Dee, I think, for transferring us to the next sessions or place in the program. Thank you again, Dr. Horsethief.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That was beautiful. Anne, I think it's actually over to you just to help us figure out where we're going next on the program. Just wanted to say again, really appreciate, it's nice to see you, Christopher and Dr. Horsethief, even though it is in a small little square. So look forward to more conversations. Danielle, thank you very much for helping us lead through the Q&A. And Annie, what are our instructions for next steps?
So first, I want to thank you, Dee, and I want to thank Dr. Horsethief for a very powerful and thought-provoking presentation and sharing your wisdom with all of us. Thank you so much. Yes, it is time for a short break, just to refill your coffee mugs, and remember that the breakout sessions start in 5 minutes with staff from every unit, the regional centers, and they are available for informal chats and networking. So the Open Water Conference website has the links, so you have to check out here and then sign out and sign back in with the unit you would like to join for this time. At 10:30, you'll head to your selected breakout rooms then, and at 11:30, be sure to check out the interesting poster sessions. Enjoy the rest of your conference, and remember to have fun, stretch in between, and stay hydrated. Enjoy. Thank you, everybody.